Today, I'm very glad to present you a joint paper with Filippo Gioacchini and Davide Gritti, who are also PhD students at the University of Trento. And in this paper, we use understanding society data to investigate gender inequality in housework and childcare during the first strict lockdown. We have all seen that the COVID pandemic has led to substantial changes in terms of employment status and working hours. And we also know from previous literature that labor changes may have non-economic effects on a variety of life outcomes, including household production and the gender division of domestic tasks. The specificity of the strict lockdown situation is that a reduction in working hours inevitably led to an increase in hours spent within the house. And just to give you an idea of how important is the phenomenon of loss in working hours we're talking about, here you can see our own calculations using the COVID-19 study of the Understanding Society. And in this graph, we show the distribution of changes in working hours from January and February 2020 to April 2020, so during the first lockdown. And here you can see results across couples. I will tell you more about the different sample specification later on, but for the moment I just wanted to show you that for the majority of the couples we have in our sample, so about 70% of the couples, we see at least one partner losing working hours during the first lockdown. And instead, just a minority of couples, about 30% or even less, showed no changes in working hours. So we are talking about an important phenomenon. We focus on the gender division of domestic work, and the literature on this topic can be summarized by highlighting three main theoretical perspectives. The first one is the time availability perspective, which postulates that time is a scarce resource and couples members manage it in a rational way. So the amount of time each individual devotes to housework and childcare primarily depends on the total amount of household work to be performed and then on the number of hours which are left from paid work. Another explanation draws instead on an economic framework. It is the so-called relative resources perspective. The assumption here is that unpaid work is inherently less attractive than paid work, and therefore partners will try to use their material resources in terms of education, occupational prestige, or income to negotiate household tasks away. This is perfectly in line with the idea of couples efficiency maximization through partner specialization. But this has also been interpreted in terms of the translation of material resources into bargaining power, enabling the richer partner to bargain these tasks away. And the final explanation focuses instead on normative and symbolic meanings associated with the performance or avoidance of such tasks. It is the so-called doing gender perspective. And the idea here is that partners will try to display their gender, and in particular their traditional gender roles, so indicating the man as the income earner and the woman as the caregiver, will try to display their gender through the performance of household tasks or the avoidance of these tasks, and will also try to neutralize possible deviance from traditional gender norms, which could arise in situations in which, for example, the woman is the breadwinner or in which the man loses working hours. We study this phenomenon in a specific context and period. We study the UK, which has been labeled as a modified male breadwinner society for its overall persistence of a gender division of domestic work, despite women's comparatively large-scale labor market participation. And we studied the first strict lockdown in which the pandemic had a strong impact on labor market. Thanks to the UK national statistics, we know indeed that there has been a 30% generalized decrease in paid working hours. Our research question in this paper is whether the reduction in working hours due to the COVID strict lockdown led heterosexual partners to reallocate time dedicated to housework and childcare. And to test the three mainstream theoretical perspectives I just presented you, we also ask whether this potential time reallocation is moderated by the type of household in terms of partners' relative contribution to total labor income. So we will distinguish in our analysis between male breadwinner, female breadwinner, and couples in which both members contribute equally to household income. We can draw three competing hypotheses depending on the theoretical perspective we will rely on. So first of all, during lockdown, there has been an increased use of the house and at the same time, the unavailability of schools or daycare centers. And this plausibly increased the need for both housework and childcare, which could of course not be outsourced. And at the same time, working hours decreased for both men and women. So according to the time availability perspective, we should expect involvement in housework and childcare to increase in step with the reductions in paid hours. Relying instead on the relative resources thesis, the family member with more resources, which we operationalize here as the monetary breadwinner, would be in the position to bargain domestic tasks away. And this is independent from the amount of housework and childcare to be performed and from working hours. The expectation here is that breadwinners do not alter the time they devote to housework and childcare, even after a reduction in paid hours. And finally, according to the dual gender perspective, deviance from traditional gender norms should trigger counter reactions aimed to display gender or to neutralize deviance. In this case, we would expect women to increase the time they devote to domestic labor and men to reduce it in the cases deviating from traditional gender norms, so when the man's paid hours reduce or when the woman is the chief breadwinner. We rely on the COVID-19 study of the Understanding Society and specifically on the April wave to focus on the strict lockdown. We merged this data with wave 9 of the UK household longitudinal study to retrieve important individual and household level information not present in the COVID study. And the deriving data give information, therefore, about three main points in time. The period covered by the UK household longitudinal study, covering 2017-2019, and then, most importantly, what we call the baseline period, so January and February 2020, and the moment of the strict lockdown, so April 2020. Our focus will be on a loss of working hours from the baseline period to the strict lockdown. Our sample is composed by cohabiting heterosexual couples aged less than 65, and we work with two distinct analytic samples, a housework one, including all couples providing information about housework, so also childless ones, and then a childcare sample, including couples that provided also information on childcare involvement. At the couple level, we define couples in which no reduction in working hours occurred, which is our reference counterfactual group, and then couples in which only the man, only the woman, or both members decreased their time in paid work. And our dependent variable is the female share of the sum of partners' hours spent in housework and childcare. More specifically about our design, what we do in practice is to compare equivalent couples, thus relying on the selection on observable assumption, in which only the work involvement has changed between the baseline period and the lockdown. So we compare couples in which one or both members lost working hours with couples that remained stable in the period from January-February to April 2020. In practice, we perform OLS regressions, including potential observed confounders that can determine both partners' risk of decreasing working hours and couples' engagement in housework and childcare. And now we can turn to the results. Here you can see the overall results for all breadwinning types of couples. The red dots refer to the percentage predicted female share of the total amount of time devoted by the couple to housework in the left panel and to childcare in the right panel. The dotted line refers to the 50%, so a perfectly gender equal share of time devoted by the partners to housework and childcare. And in the x-axis, you can see all the possible situations of losses in working hours. So first of all, our reference group in which none lost working hours, and then all the other treatment groups. The first result that we can see in this figure is that in the counterfactual situation in which nobody lost working hours during the lockdown, the woman devotes most of the time to housework and childcare, between 60 and 70% of the total time devoted by the couple. However, when one of the members of the couple loses working hours, there seems to be a certain degree of rationality in the reallocation of time to household tasks. Indeed, the person losing working hours seems to increase time spent in housework and childcare. But interestingly enough, when both partners lose working hours, there is no significant change with the reference group. So the woman keeps devoting most of the time to both housework and childcare. What happens when we disaggregate these findings by breadwinning type of household? Here you can see results for housework in the top panels and for childcare in the bottom ones. And let's focus first of all on male breadwinner families. Here you can see that when the man who is the breadwinner loses working hours, he doesn't significantly increase his time devoted to both housework and childcare. And this seems to point to a mechanism which is predicted by the relative resources thesis. So the breadwinner seems to be able to bargain domestic tasks away even when he loses working hours. Results for similar earnings couples are very similar to the overall ones, so I will directly skip to the results for female breadwinner households. And in this case, we can see an overall more gender equal share of both housework and especially childcare. But when the man loses working hours, there is no change compared to the reference group, so he doesn't really increase time in housework. And when the woman who is the breadwinner here loses working hours, she exceptionally and disproportionately increases her time devoted to housework, delineating the highest marginal difference with the reference group. And this points to the possible presence of twin gender mechanisms, since female breadwinner households indeed deviate from traditional gender norms. To conclude, the results I just showed you are robust to different sensitivity checks, and I will be more than happy to discuss about them in the discussion. And we have seen that overall, the partner losing working hours tend to increase time spent in domestic chores, but this depends on who is the main breadwinner. And indeed, we saw that gender gaps in marginal differences to the counterfactual situation in which nobody lost working hours point to a higher additional commitment of women in case of a reduction in working hours. And this seems that the time availability perspective can be only partly confirmed in our analysis. We found some evidence in favor of the relative resources thesis instead, and in particular in male breadwinner families. And finally, and most interestingly, according to our interpretation, we found the likely presence of twin gender mechanisms in female breadwinner households. And that's it. Thank you very much.